I would like first to start by saying thank you, as everyone else express my gratitude to Titus first for conceiving this project, for making me a part of it, and obviously to Honor and Saki Sabanchi for organizing and hosting us today for this wonderful conference. So I would like today to share part of my research with you, which is about the introduction of Arabic foundry types in Europe, and in particular about the approach to their studies. To stay in the theme of today, my introduction to typography started from a course I did many years ago in Milan. The course consisted of learning about the history of types and learning all the steps to produce a booklet, from typesetting, illustrating, printing, and hand binding it. This experience was very formative for me because it sparked an interest that became my career, and it contributed to shape my approach to design and research in the typographic field. It taught me a great deal about learning where things come from and experience how they work in the environment they are built for, the difference between looking at something and using it, and it gave me a small taste of the importance of tools and manuality in a printing office. When it came to researching Arabic script and foundry types, it seemed natural to me to follow the same approach. Studying the origin of the Arabic script means learning about the development of the script in its manuscript form that reached the highest level of perfection with calligraphy. Studying the origin of Arabic typography means learning about the transition to a new technological environment and the challenges of translating the Arabic script into print. This is the first book printed with Arabic movable metal type in Italy in 1514. It is clear from a quick glance that the earliest typographic image of Arabic was a far cry from its handwritten representations. However, it takes much more to explain what generated this visual discrepancy. This includes understanding manufacturing processes, script requirements, and the context of their production. To be historically accurate, the first appearances of Arabic printed types in Europe were in the form of woodcuts in 3 books published in Germany, in Italy, and in Spain. And Arabic wood type continued to be used in Europe even after the first printed book with movable metal type, and they were published in Italy, in England, in France, in Germany. The continued use of Arabic wood types was due to the shortage of Arabic movable metal types available in Europe. This shortage was at a time also overcome by using Syriac movable metal type to set Arabic, or by adding Arabic letters by hand after printing in the white spaces left in the text by the compositor. We mentioned earlier that in order to understand how and why the typographic image of the Arabic script came to be, we need to understand the factors that contributed to the production of Arabic types. Starting from the historical landscape of Europe in the 16th century, Christendom was divided between the Eastern churches, with Rome as the capital, that here is illustrated in solid red, and the Eastern churches, which are in striped red. In 1453, Constantinople was conquered by Muslim powers and became the capital of the Ottoman Empire. The geographical, religious, and political landscape is a critical backdrop for the beginning of Arabic printing, especially to identify why it originated in a particular place, who founded it, and so on. This brings us to the driving forces of Arabic printing and to the question, well, who had interest in producing Arabic books and who wanted Arabic books? Devotion and learning are central to answer these questions. On one hand, Christian missionaries had interest in Arabic language in order to reach a wider audience in the East, to form a union with the local churches and potentially convert Muslims to Christianity. On the other hand, Orientalists and scholars used Arabic to access original bodies of work in different fields, such as medicine and philosophy. And for instance, as a tool to elucidate some etymology of words in the Hebrew language. Knowing who had interest in producing and using books printed in Arabic is useful to learn about markets for these books, the investments, the print runs, and so on. The study of Arabic movable metal type produced before the 20th century mainly relies on the printed books in which they were used. The imprints are important because the observation of how the types appear can carry clues about their manufacture, and in turn, it gives insights about the history. However, finding the clues is neither trivial nor straightforward. We need to know where to look for them and have a method to weave them together in a structured manner. Due to the scarcity of historical records of type making, we need to work backwards. So from the imprints to the object used to produce them, in a way starting from the end of the process to understand the beginning. So having a method to approach the sources is as important as having knowledge of the technological background for the making of foundry types and all the stages of manufacture, from cutting punches, striking matrices, casting swords, and finally typesetting and printing. The technological background goes hand in hand with the people involved in the process. People with different levels of craftsmanship produced very different results using the same tools. So punch cutter, for instance, worked in the same environment, but their work varied greatly. Likewise, the level of script-specific knowledge involved in the production has to be accounted for. Considering the limited market and this interest in the Arabic language in 16th century Europe, it is unlikely that the pioneers of Arabic typography had any understanding of Arabic, but they relied on visual models to copy from, that is from in our Arabic manuscript, and were available on the advice of more knowledgeable people. The Arabic-speaking community in 16th century Europe was not limited to Orientalists and scholars who studied the language. It gained members in the form of visitors from the Eastern churches, converts to Catholicism who joined the Neophyte and Maronite College that opened in Rome in 1577 and 1584, and captives in the continued conflicts between Christians and Muslims. This varied community of Arabic speakers made important contributions to Arabic studies in Europe, supplying European Orientalists and printers with teachers, proofreaders, and scribes, and last but not least, with Arabic manuscripts. Some of these Arabic manuscripts were war booty, others were personal possessions, gifts, or acquisition in the East by visitors, scholars, and merchants, and others were produced in Europe by some of these members of the Arabic-speaking community that we mentioned earlier, and we have one example of each here. The importance of Arabic manuscripts circulating in Europe is that they provided visual models of the Arabic script to the pioneers of Arabic typography. This was not different, for instance, than the manuscript that in the 15th century provided visual models of the humanistic script in use at the time, and that was the basis for the development of the Roman type. However, the familiarity with the script and the characteristic of the script itself can make the process of translating written form into type more or less challenging for the type maker and might require external support. This is a manuscript showing the humanistic hand of Bartolomeo Sanvito, an Italian scribe and master of the humanistic Italic script. A European punch cutter looking at this manuscript to develop a type would be familiar with the alphabet, the shape of the underwritten letter form, and how they worked as a unit. He would also be familiar with the language, the convention of some letter forms like ligatures, abbreviation, marks for contractions, and their spatial use. For instance, the long form of S was used at the beginning or in the middle of a word, and the short form of S was used at the end. The unconnected nature of the script with letter form that repeated themselves always in the same form with rare exceptions like the S contributed to easing the task of identifying the individual units to turn into punches, as there is a one-to-one correspondence. So the letter A is always the same, and so is the N, and so on for all the characters. Special characters, such as ligatures, and even characters for contractions, the one that have a mark on the top, can also exist on independent punches and fit into the same system, where each unit sits next to each other without affecting the characters that follow and that precede them. So the functionality of the system as a whole is predictable and therefore is more manageable. The resulting printed work looks very close to its manuscript counterpart, so the handwritten forms, which are at the top on the left, they correspond to the type forms at the bottom. Now, let's imagine the scenario of a European punch cutter looking at an Arabic manuscript available in Europe, being unfamiliar with the script. So if he had the alphabet in front of him, he might have been able to identify individual characters by looking at those forms that repeated themselves, like the isolated meme here. But the meme has also other forms, depending on where in the words it occurs, so it's a beginning, middle of the end. If identified, this form, they could also be added to the list of punches to cut to cover the alphabet, so to speak. So these are the other forms. Looking more closely, in this particular manuscript extract, 5 out of 6 times, the meme in initial position it's always followed by the same character, so it's by a nun. Since this seems to happen a lot, perhaps it would make sense to have this block ready as one character. Going even deeper, when this block of 2 characters occur, it always comes with other marks, so these little segments above and below that we know being vowels. So the punch cutter could decide to only cut one punch of the character in initial position, so it can be attached to any other character. He could choose to add a punch to represent what is effectively a ligature, which is number 2, and he could choose to represent this ligature with or without these marks, like in 2 or 3. Or he could choose a combination of 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 to have more options. There is also another option, which is to have the ligature without the marks and have them available separately to add when necessary. This option is only viable by exploring the possibilities of technology and relying more heavily on typesetting. And actually, since the 2 shapes are the same, he only needs to cut one punch, and it's up to the typesetter to place it in the right place. The same goes for the medial meme. It actually appears in 2 different forms in this manuscript extract, one of which seems to appear always with the same character. So again, it can be decided by the punch cutter to have one punch for this ligature. For the next form, in 3 out of 6 times, it occurs with the same group of letters. There are also marks with this block of repeating characters that are not always the same, especially the dots change in number and position. So the punch cutter could choose to make only a punch for the medial form that seems to combine with every other character, so the number 2, and consider providing a punch for this recurring combination block of character, so the number 3. But the punch cutter can decide that this is a step too far and that it would implicate making many more of these punches with multiple character blocks so that he could settle to have just the 2 previous forms. Now, having gone through all of these decisions, the final plan for this one character could be to have 4 punches to represent the letter meme in the different forms, and then have 2 of the most recurring ligatures in this extract. This decision would cover everything that it's marked in blue, but it's a limited decision because it's just what we see in this manuscript extract. So we would still miss all the other contextual alternates and other forms for this character. This is just a snippet of a possible scenario, and we can see how difficult it would be to navigate the type-making decision process on the basis of a manuscript alone. It is evident how familiarity with the script or having access to someone who is could make a critical difference. We can be sure that punch cutters referenced manuscript models and that they had working processes, but when it comes to the early Arabic types and European type makers, we don't have much records of either. If we look at Arabic types from different century, here 16th, 18th, and 20th, we can see straight away that there was a progression and varying levels of accomplishments. But how do we establish and describe this progression? We need some objective criteria to allow making precise observations of Arabic type forms as they appear on the printed page. For the Arabic script, these are some of the central criteria of typographic analysis. These key characteristics can be gathered even from limited printed samples and can provide a starting point for the assessment of type for which extensive sources might not be available. The advantage of these criteria is that they can be used to evaluate type in isolation or systematically compare types produced by different people in different conditions. We can also use this criteria to compare type forms with handwritten forms because they belong to the script itself, regardless of the medium. Let's see some examples. We have here 4 Quran extracts, 1 from an Ottoman calligrapher at the top and 3 foundry types. By looking at the criteria one by one, we can straight away make some assessments and compare how different type makers and calligraphy rendered or dealt with each element. So we can look at the individual forms, here Ba and Ra, and look at the shape, proportion, and weight distribution. We can then check if the type forms show the influence of a particular calligraphic style and if this influence is carried throughout. There are some key letterforms to do so. We'll go back to it shortly. We can then look at how these letters behave when they are joined together and assess the quality of the connections, the alignment of the letters, and so on. The criteria can essentially help us to describe and compare how things look, but to make further evaluation into why things appear a certain way, we need to look at the wider picture. For a given foundry type, we can identify specific characteristics. Some can betray technological limitations, others the competence of the people involved in the processes, the circumstances, or intentional design-related decisions. Now let's see another example. This is an extract of a psalter printed in Italy in 1516. It contains the second Arabic type made in Europe. If we look closely at the type, we can spot some peculiar features in the shaping and proportion of certain characters. These characteristics can be associated with a particular style of Arabic calligraphy, which is the Maghribi style, here in a Quranic manuscript from the Library of Congress collection. Some of these features are shown here in both the manuscript and the type. We could also comment on the visual quality of these type forms and do some consideration about proportions, strokes, etc., but let's just focus on the style for now. The presence of these characteristics in the typeface is evidence that the punch cutter was probably looking at a Maghribi manuscript when designing this Arabic type, which he followed by incorporating these features, whether consciously or not, we can't establish that. However, there is another detail that helps us to introduce another information to the story. There is something that doesn't quite match up in the stroke termination of the lam aleph ligature and the isolated aleph and initial lam characters. The lam aleph ligature has club-like terminations created by the rounded nib, typical of the Maghribi style. On the other hand, the aleph and lam have pointy terminals produced with the obliquely cut nib used for calligraphic styles like Thuluth and Naskh. And we can see here the Thuluth manuscript is from the Sabanci collection. Although the Maghribi style does not follow strict calligraphic rules, it has developed a certain degree of conformity and characteristic features, and the presence of both these stroke terminations suggests two hypotheses. Either that the type maker strictly followed a somewhat compromised manuscript where these features live together, or that he looked at a manuscript in different styles and inadvertently mixed them features together. He mixed up features that did not belong together. The mixtures of calligraphic styles is not uncommon in European Arabic foundry types. It is actually one of the main features. On the other hand, in Islamic calligraphy, there is a clear distinction between styles, which traditionally can be used side by side, but not mixed in the same text. In this table here, which is based on Thomas Myler's research, we have two Islamic calligraphic styles, Thuluth and Naskh, in the top and bottom rows, with some of the letters that characteristically differ between Arabic styles. In the middle, we have the type forms from the most influential Arabic type of Robert Grandjean for the Italian Typografia Medicea in the 16th century. As we can see, the type forms match two different styles. The more deviation from a particular style we can find, the higher is the level of hybridization of the script. But why is this important? Identifying the mixture of styles of European Arabic foundry types unequivocally denotes a script knowledge issues of the people involved in the type making, and possibly also an issue with the models and the advisor available to the type makers. Another set of clues present in the source might denote a different issue that is not linked to script competence, but to technical issues in type making. For instance, in different Arabic foundry types, we can observe irregularity in the positions of the diacritical dots. At first, and without accounting for production processes, we could attribute the misplacements of the dot to poor script knowledge. However, this is a clear evidence of a type-making technique used to reduce the number of punches required for characters sharing the same base form, as you can see above. So solution C is the most economical, as it allows to obtain 3 characters by making one single punch for the base, including all the possible dots. The dots are then filed off before composition to obtain the required characters. Knowledge of type-making processes also tells us that this solution required one strike of the matrix and one casting, unlike the others that require multiple. But this is more laborious at typesetting stage. So the work of the punch cutter is the highest in the chain of production, and his work was the most expensive. So financial limitation might impose this sort of approach, even if that compromised the appearance of the characters, as the dot for the letter Fa, that we can see here, would be able, for instance, couldn't be in the correct position central above the counter. So the only damage limitation in this case for the letter Fa would be to avoid the dot moving around by consistently filing off the same dot. During my research, I was able to find the evidence of this technique outside the printed sources, and below you can see the punches that carry all the dots necessary to make different characters, and by variously shaving off the dots. So basically what we've seen in solution X, and at the bottom you can see the punches and then how they appear on the printed page. So you can see the letter Ha that has a dot above and in the middle, and then the 2 printed form that we can achieve by shaving off the required dots. The presence and placement of vowels can also betray issues of different natures in typography. Their absence might be due to the nature of the text that would not require vocalization, or might be a symptom of a lack of investment and resources to produce them. So looking at the work in Naskh style of some Ottoman master calligraphers, we can see an idea of what these marks are supposed to look like in manuscript form in terms of sizing, color, and position in relation to the characters. In typographic works that accommodated for the presence of marks and vowel, we can see how the appearance varies greatly, as shown in this selection of work from the 16th to the 20th centuries. To understand the reason for these differences, we need to have an extensive knowledge of the technological processes and implication to produce them. When their use was required, type makers had to come up with solution on how to handle them. Usually, this solution implied some sort of compromises, perhaps in the amount of marks provided, in the visual consistency or correct placement. The imprints can, at times, carry clues of the method used. For instance, if we notice the same characters are repeating, like the ra and the wow at the top, with the same vowels differently positioned, it might indicate that the vowels were cast separately from the base character. If we notice the same characters repeating with a vowel that always look the same, like the example in the center, it might indicate that the vowels was on the same sort of the base character. The second method implied a larger number of punches and a bigger composing case to accommodate for those sorts, but it simplified the work of the compositor. On the other hand, having independent vowels made the work of the compositor more fiddly. The vowels could move out of position, and it was easier to make mistakes, such as composing them upside down or flipped, as you can see in the highlighted bits at the bottom. I've also found various evidence in the surviving type material, such as punches carrying vowels, usually provided for the most recurring combination, as in the top examples. And in the middle, we can see sorts with independently cast vowels, here for the letter fata, for the vowel fata. In order to allow for better positioning in relation to the base character, it was possible to cast vowels on different height on the source. And we can also see the matrices with the same purpose on the right. At the bottom, we can see evidence of another method used that provided punches with a combination of diacritic dots and vowels, which are the highlighted one. And even for the fata, we can see one sort that has the fata and the dot together. There were, of course, other known methods to handle marks used before Arabic, for example, for the Latin and Greek script. One method was to have stepped punches where the vowel could be attached to strike the matrix at once and produce sorts with characters and accented cast together. The other method, which you can see at the bottom, was to have kerned base characters and marks. When combined, the hover-hanging character could rest on the body of the accent for support, forming an accented sort with full body. This technique was a common method used for Greek floating accent. With the kerned method, the vowels were virtually locked with the characters it belonged to, so an accurate position for the diacritical marks was easier to achieve. Both these techniques were in use in early 16th century, although unkerned sorts were preferred as the kerned ones would be fragile and prone to breaking. There is evidence of both these methods used for Arabic vocalization. The standard way to typeset vocalized Arabic with separately cast vowels required 3 lines, 1 for the characters and 2 above and below for the vowels, as you can see in the example in the middle. The disadvantages of this method was that it was slow for compositors and that the vowels were prone to move in the proofs, besides the fact that they were often positioned too far from the base character, especially for the marks above and below above the lowest characters like ra and wow. Amongst the different approaches to improve on this method, the one developed by Homan Hollock for the American press in Beirut in 1838, above, you can see in the images above, and the one developed by the Reverend Jules Ferret, missionary in Damascus in 1859. The first method at the top was for handling vowel, consisted in inserting vowels in the letter itself by the means of a groove, as shown in the example on the right shows a groove type. The vowels would also be cast on different heights for optimal position. This method increased the quality in the vocalization and had the vowels securely locked in place. It claimed to ease composition and the correction of proofs, as the vowels could be just taken out of the groove and switched to a different one instead of having to refit the whole line of vowels if there was a mistake. This technical innovation was combined with characters cast on 5 different alignments to improve the joining quality. However, the font in question, so the American Arabic, faced a lot of manufacturing issues, and the typesetting proved to have a level of complexity for printers, and for printers it hindered the advantages of having a more accurate representation of the Arabic script. At the bottom, we have a method that aimed to simplify vocalized Arabic with quicker and less expensive system that those practiced so far, and more effective in controlling the accurate position of vowels relative to the base character. This new method required only 1 line of composition instead of 3, and the vowels were added above Kashida segments. You can see in the example at the top. That extended the connections and were composed after the characters that they belong to. To vocalize a final or unconnected character, the sort with the vowel was composed in the same way, but it did not bear a connection. The method had many limitations. The vowels overhanged the body, so they were prone to breaking. They unnecessarily lengthened connections between characters. This method could only be used with types that did not have a multi-level connection, as it's illustrated at the bottom on the right. And it was not possible to use with ligatures because it was not possible to vocalize the first letter of the ligature if it needed a vowel. So simplification in type making and typesetting resulted into compromises affecting the rendering of the script. To conclude, we have seen today just a snippet of the consideration around the development of Arabic foundry types and how the transition to a new technological environment generated a discrepancy between the visual qualities of the handwritten script that historically was formalized in various calligraphic styles and its typographic image. Sitting in the space between the accomplishments of calligraphy and the possibilities of modern technology, these typographic products have to be assessed in the boundaries of their historical time and technological environment. As shown, it is extremely important to identify the many factors that affected their production and ultimately their appearance in order to evaluate them and understand their relative impact and legacy on the evolution of the Arabic script. Besides casting light on aspects of Arabic typographic history that are missing, incomplete, or faulty, adding building blocks to knowledge, which is ultimately the goal of research. Thank you very much.